Hello adventurers, and welcome back to my channel. Today we are just inside of Washington along the 101, and we are stopping off at a historic church. But there's a lot more to this story than the church itself, and I'm about to show you the grounds and what you need to see when you come here. Now, one of the things that I really love is a place that you can come to get some new brain wrinkles. I think we all know that by watching my channel, but something else I love is when that brain wrinkle is accessible to us all. This definitely is. In fact, as you come here, there are nice wide ADA trails. There are also ramps to get up to this viewing platform that has some interesting facts as it overlooks the Columbia River Bay Area. It's pretty fascinating, and there's a lot of history here, so let's kind of see what we can get ourselves into while we're looking around some of these points of interest. Now, as we look on from the viewpoint, you'll notice to the left is a beautiful church, but in front of us is this beautiful Waterfront Bay Area. In fact, right across the water there, that is where you can see Astoria. So we're right across from Astoria. But this waterfront actually has served a purpose for many, many years for many people, long before the settlers came here. Now, this sign asks you to imagine a time when travel on the river was never out of sight of a village. Smoke drifts from the cedar planked roofs. The Chinook seemed to spend as much time on the water as they did on land. Here you learn a bit more about how that would work. In fact, they were a river and marine culture. Their genius was the watercraft. And in fact, you can see here a couple of examples of what this might have looked like. Now, there is an example on site as well that we're going to go over to in just a moment. But these were very unique canoes that they had created that would allow them to push through the fresh water, the turbulence, and all of the tides along this crazy Columbia River right here. Now, at the Maritime Museum, we learned that the Native Americans of this area were considered masters of the waterways. And in fact, whenever settlers came into this area, and eventually the later and later as establishments grew, they were still looking toward the concepts that the Native Americans had, because they were able to tame the wildness of the rivers. Especially during the winter months, the Columbia gets crazy, guys. In fact, they call this the bar region that we're looking at right now, and it's one of the areas that is the most tumultuous for any ship to go down. And at the same time, this was a place that was just like the backyard of these native people. And so they were taming those waters long before anyone else came here. And we learned a lot from them as a result. But as we continue looking at each of these displays, we learn a little bit more about these very unique people. In fact, here it says a lost world, and it says that some of their stories describe a different world, a mythical time of fire and ice when animals could speak and people actually listened. They also talk about some of their mythological figures, such as a blue jay or a coyote or a raven or a robin. And if you'll notice, each of these being birds kind of makes sense, because along the coast there are numerous species of birds that constantly you can hear their songs. In addition, we get a look at some of the different tools that they would have used at the time. And some of these still look pretty familiar, like the salmon hook right here, but others are a bit more antiquated and things that we have kind of moved past a little. However, it's kind of fascinating to see how these were used to create some of the things that they had. Now, as you continue going around this area, there's a circle right here that tells you a little bit more of the history of the people that I encourage you guys to look at. It basically tells you the creation story and some of their most important details. It says that the groups of people that would live together usually would flock together in family groups, and they thrived off of the Columbia River. Each of them had an important job, and it was very important that they all also held each other accountable to these for the safety of their overall unit. So it's pretty fascinating, but this is just scratching the surface. We're about to head back down this little trail and go over to the main feature here on the property, which is the church. It has a couple of different things around it and some more information. Let's go learn. Welcome to Middle Village. This place is where the river meets the ocean, and here you can see the various kinds of people and also some of the information about the different things that have happened in this area. On this sign alone, it tells you that by the 18th century, Americans and Europeans were first starting to arrive first for trade and ultimately to lay claim on the Northwest. In 1805, Lewis and Clark's Corps of Discovery arrived, and from here, they achieved their mission of reaching the Pacific Ocean. Now, there's a lot of debate about Lewis and Clark, and as I've stopped at various stops, I've noticed that they all incorporate into one another to tell the overall story. I definitely encourage you guys to check out my Fort Clatsop video. That is ultimately where they bedded down for the winter to survive the cold, harsh elements here. And also check out my Cape Disappointment Interpretive Center video because it tells a bit more of the story of Lewis and Clark. Now, I find it fascinating when I read something like this because it does tell us that there were people coming here before Lewis and Clark. They just weren't through a proper discovery mission. And so they were coming mostly as independent traders. And the Native American people who were here already, the indigenous people, they were already forming communication with those people, which kind of debunks some of the things that they've said about Lewis and Clark were happening upon these people and discovering them for the first time. However, I think it's fascinating to learn that right there. But there's more. Now, if you are interested to learn a little bit more about all of the search for the Northwest Passage and also some of the missions that have come through this area to discover the land, then definitely check out this sign. And if you're interested in finding out how the collision of cultures actually worked out and how they came to terms with one another being in this place at the same time, you'll definitely want to check out the timeline on this one. But this sign is potentially the one that's going to mean the most to you as you visit this interpretive site. You see, each one of these points here is something special, and it tells you a little bit more about a part of the overall story. Of course, St. Mary's is number 5. It is the highlight for most because it is the most defined piece of the trail for sure, but this is an overall quarter-mile walk that is ADA friendly and definitely something that is worth a look. You have a river overlook, a loop trail, a Chinook plank house, and a contact overlook. Now, this is set up to resemble kind of how one of the original villages would have looked. So this all has a plan as to why it's set up the way that it is, so definitely get out here and explore it. Now, on our first stop, I talked about some of the boats that they use to navigate, and here they have 3 examples of those. And each one is a little bit different than the last. You have one that is a very large boat here, and it has plenty of space for tons of different people, and then also for fish and other things that they would bring in. You'll notice that it has a very pointed end on that side that also has a small channel so that water can kind of flow through and not get stuck. Then you come over to this one, and it's a bit more of a primitive look, not quite as polished on the ends. This one would be more of a traditional style canoe. It's a dugout. You could see where each of those little dugout pieces would come from using those tools that we looked at earlier. And again, plenty of seating so that they could get out there and go after some of the bigger fish and also some of the other sea life. Now, here also you'll find out more about the business of trade as a whole. This was something that was very important to the tribes. They would trade with their neighboring communities and also could do a lot of different damage when it comes to the business of those who were coming in to settle. So as they were doing this, they could teach people how to do their craft. However, they could also profit off of their craft instead. So they were widespread fishermen. They usually would go after salmon, sturgeon, and the women were in charge of all of the skinning and gutting is what we learned here. That would be a stinky job. Now, I for one do not want to be the one cleaning up the fish. I don't like fish very much. I think it's smelly and gross, and I don't even really eat that much fish, so I probably wouldn't have survived very well up here in the Pacific Northwest. However, I do find it fascinating that each person had a unique job and that without one, they couldn't function as a whole. It was a unit, it was a core, it was a family unit like we learned earlier, and it was also a business unit. At our next stop, we learn a little bit more about the culture of the Chinooks. They actually operated on a sophisticated system of occupancy and possession that was more complex than modern day concepts of ownership even. Can you imagine that? And as we go along here, you can find a few more interesting structures. So definitely check this out. It has one of the original plank houses and then also a basket here. Great historic photos, very clear, very easy to see, very accessible to us all. Now, when it came to trade, we have seen many locations before about trade beads and different things like that, but the maritime people were actually more fur traders. And so here you can see a little bit more information about the furs that they would trade. This kind of goes back and echoes some of the other themes that I found at the Maritime Museum also, but goes into a bit more detail right here. So you might be asking, did everyone speak the same language? How did this work? How could they do trade with one another? Well, no, they did not speak the same language, and a lot of times that actually did not stand in their way. They had a ceremonial way about doing things where they could present the items that they were wanting to trade, and each person, again, had a pivotal part in this. So this is how they would communicate even across language barriers. Even whenever the settlers came in, this is how that they started out communicating until there was another way that they could find that they could actually verbalize. So I thought that that was pretty neat, and this is the first place that's actually tackled that I've been to, so I thought that that was pretty cool, and definitely makes it worth the stop. Now, it's a little bit more shady here, so this is a good stop as you are kind of on the trail to cool off a bit under these trees. But right here we learn a little bit more about some of the sad realities of what have happened. And this is the part of history that never is a positive outlook. It really isn't. There's no way you can look at this and say, oh my goodness, yes, this was positive. In fact, a lot of the Native Americans in this area passed away as a result of diseases that the white people, the settlers, the people who were coming in would bring in with them. Now, this is the part of history, again, that isn't the best part of history. A lot of people don't realize just how much of an impact that the settlers had on the Native people as they came in. In fact, a lot of the things that were westernized kind of diseases that we now think of as commonplace, like flu, didn't exist back then for these people. They had never experienced those kind of germs, those kind of like toxic things. And so a lot of sepsis happened, a lot of the flu, a lot of measles, mumps, things like that, things that were never seen before. And so it basically wiped out entire villages as it ran rampant after the settlers started coming in for these trades. And I think that this is the part of the trail that, because it's in a nice peaceful place of the shade, even though there's a road right over there, you can kind of take a moment and reflect on that. How would you have felt if you were one of these people and all of a sudden your entire village was getting wiped out by something you had no idea what it even was? It's really tragic. And so take some time here. Another boardwalk section, and it looks like there is an overlook just over here. Now here we can also find a little bit more information about Lewis and Clark though, and the map of what they discovered and what the land looked like at that time. You can see here some of the original writings of Clark. You can see how he would chart the course that they were taking through the series of dots. You can see the topography as he has drawn lines to differentiate different things, and then also the waterways. Now also here you can find different viewpoints, and this is probably one of the more unique things that I have seen. So down here it actually has a placard with two different arrows, Point William and Cape Disappointment. You can rotate this so that you can see the different points. So if you were wanting to see Point William, all you have to do is line it up, and then we will go look through this, and in the distance there, that is Point William. Now we've been to Cape Disappointment, and that grayish looking rising from the bottom of the ocean there, that is actually Cape Disappointment from this site. But not only can you look at each one of these, but you can also get an idea as to what they are and why they are important, and a little bit of a backstory. Now that's a really cool way to tie all the different pieces together to show you the important places that this particular storyline would follow. And there's 5 different points of interest right over there that have some great views. Now if you have a zoom camera, you can zoom in on those a little bit better, or bring your binoculars. Here we find out a little bit more about the cannery and dock, and actually this is pretty fascinating because I learned that the canning industry was huge here at one point in time, and finally everything started to kind of fade into the distance and industry moved away. But here you can learn a little bit more about how some of these canneries worked and where one was located just a short distance from this location. This is what that would have looked like, and now if you go to that same spot, it's just a bunch of pylons that are just kind of floating out in the water still. It's just a distant memory. Now at one one point in time, 45 to 50 tons of fish went through that cannery. That is a lot. But one of the things that I have learned about the canning industry is it wouldn't have been here if it wouldn't have been for the Chinook people, because the Chinooks started the fishing industry off by showing them the way of the water. And so I think, again, there's a lot of things that just tie in together here at this particular site. And so it's great that they have talked about each and every one of them, but there's more. But after that, how did life change for the Native people? The ones that were so influential? Well, after decades of different people coming here to check out the land and do trade, Fort Astoria was built in 1811. It was then that several fur traders and missionaries started to publish narratives of their visits. Some included the observation of the tribes and their lifestyles. They described the people in decline from smallpox, measles, malaria, and other diseases. Many villages had been completely abandoned and populations were greatly reducing. By 1825, the plank houses of Middle Village were completely burned down. And again, the historic photos here showing how they were still using nets at the beginning of the first decade of the 20th century. Now, as we followed the story, the McGowans continue to pop up here, and the McGowans actually pop up once again. Just north of the church are concrete foundations and actually a piece of an old milking shed that still are here, and you can find the historic photo of what that would have looked like. And now this is what this area looks like. It's a very different view than what you might have seen at one time. Nature is taking over in this area, and the buildings that once were are no more. Speaking of the McGowans, here you go, right here. In fact, this sign is talking about the canning industry of P.J. McGowan and Sons. And also here you can find out a little bit more about what exactly P.J. McGowan was up to when he came here. It shows that he was given a land grant for $1,200, and he and his wife Jane filed donation land claims for 320 acres in 1853. This one is actually showing a cannery worker pressing the doorway of one of McGowan's canneries around the 1900s. And here we learn a little bit more of the buildings that would have been in this area. In fact, just east of the church was a wooden building known as the bachelor's quarters. It was a small house that was used by the fishermen. And then nearby was the family house. The family house went on to be restructured a bit after the passing of PJ, and 6 generations of his family actually stood on this property at one point in time. Now, why do we keep talking about the McGowan family? Well, the reason why is because this property is entirely here as a result of the McGowans. This was a piece of their family property, but also this has a significance to them as well. And now we have made it to stop number 5, so let's find out more. In 1904, P.J. McGowan actually donated the land and paid for the construction of this Catholic church. It was built in Port Orford cedar and also was the home of about 150 worshipers. The town in its heyday had many families that lived there, and after the cannery moved, the fish traps and this. So at that heyday, there were 150 families. People were going there literally religiously. And at the same time, industry again changed. We talked about that over there where industry kind of up and moved out. And whenever that happened, unfortunately, this church also fell victim to all of that mass exodus that was happening. And as a result, it wasn't serving the purpose in the same way, but it had such a significance to the family that something special happened. In 1962, the church was actually restored, and it was re-hosting visitors once again at this particular location. It is absolutely gorgeous and looks a little bit different than its previous life, where it was a white standing building. But here is a historic photo to kind of show you what it would have looked like at that time. So ultimately, how does this story end? Well, the Chinook people are actually still in this area. They are remembering the significance of this time and all of the heritage that they have. And the McGowans continue to live in this area too. It appears that everyone can coexist. Now today was a great day for Brain Wrinkles. I'm glad we stopped off here. It was absolutely awesome to learn the history of this church, but also the native people who were here and how everything kind of worked out in the end with the people that came here versus the people who were already here and how they still coexist even today. I think that stops like this are so awesome because even though it's just a small roadside stop, there's tons of information. So you never know what you're going to find when you just do a little pull off. I always encourage you guys to do that. Remember guys, we're not here for a long time, but we are here for a good time, and places like this are definitely that. Until next time guys, bye!